Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and a very good morning and welcome back to Beyond This. With August being Women's Month, we know the amount of difficulties that we generally see, we hear about, but today we're flipping the lid and changing the story as we always do. We're celebrating strong women around us, and there is no one other than Qaanitah Hunter, a forerunner in journalism, an award-winning journalist, and the founder of the Debrief Network, someone who I've told for years, without trying to sound patronizing, how proud we are of her, how she's portrayed us, how she's put us in the forefront. And when I say us, she truly is a reflection of all of us. So when we own your achievements, we all own it as our own. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the studios.
Wa alaikum salam. I'm so happy to be here and congratulations on an amazing podcast.
Thank you so much. You know, I always tell you how proud we are of you, and I think that's for another platform to talk about all that you've achieved. I want to get straight into it with you because our time on the show is always very limited. Qaanitah, when you are doing your journalism, and we see it coming up in Debrief Network, we're watching you on news all the time. How do you separate sensationalism, which has eroded public trust, from authentic and credible journalism?
So I think that there are multiple things that happen. Sensationalism will always be, at the fringe of news because it's something, what bleeds leads. And that's essentially has been the space for a very long time. But what's been interesting is that the public has grown tired with that. And at the center of what we do is trust and credibility. And so if you can't back up what you're reporting, and if you cannot present the substance very quickly, it creates an environment where people lose trust in you and you see diminishing audiences. And so I have watched audience engagement with different media houses. If you look at the big ones, if you look at the New York Times, if you look at the Times internationally, you can see how people are becoming less and less tolerant of sensationalism. I'll give you a good example. This week, the Time magazine ran a front page about Gaza being hungry. Exactly a year ago, they ran a cover that was extremely praising of Benjamin Netanyahu. And in their characterization of these hungry Palestinian women, there is no mention that they're not incidentally being starved, that they are actually being deliberately starved by Israel, in a designed effort to force famine, to manufacture famine in a genocidal agenda. And so what we see around sensationalism has come back in different ways. Clickbait.
I was just going to ask you on that. But with this clickbait and there's headlines and exactly what you described, how do you manage to stay rooted in truth rather than just chasing trends so it's not for performative audience?
So I think how we consume media is very important. And I think that this is a very good platform to kind of talk about consumption and your social media hygiene for yourself as ordinary people. So not only as myself as a journalist, not only people who are in the public domain, but as an ordinary consumer of the news, the ordinary consumer of information, and an ordinary consumer of content. There are several factors to consider. One, what's my source? Where am I getting this information from? The credibility of that source. And thirdly, what are other people saying about this? So before I make up my mind around a particular issue, there has to be a level of probity that has to exist as a consumer. Now, we've never envisioned, when I started my career a decade and a half ago, you never envisioned a world where there's just so much of information so readily available all the time.
Yes.
And so it feels like an avalanche. And it's hard then to distinguish when you're just thrown with so much. And the opposite effect is happening. The more information there is, the less people are consuming the news. And so you have what you call news avoidance, where there can be screaming headlines. There can be, 500 videos on a particular topic, but ordinary people would have just switched off because it's just too much.
And just swipe, yeah.
And swipe, right? And so the incentive to be a little bit more discerning about consuming information, trusting journalists, and actually taking the time, sometimes even the money, to support or to pay for news that's valuable, comes from a very simple foundation, which is this: democracies die in darkness. The freedoms that we have, the human rights that we enjoy, all are at jeopardy when we do not have the media playing a watchdog role, right? And we see real-time and human consequences of this. We see how the propaganda machine of Israel has actually enabled them to get away with the genocide for 2 years. We see it in real time. We see the opposite of it. We see how the media exposed, for example, corruption in the police, to the point now there's a judicial commission of inquiry, right? And so that dance between, there's just so much of information, we don't know what to focus on, and understanding that without this, we are actually more doomed than we think. Let's take Johannesburg, right? We live in this city, me and you. It is daily falling into dereliction. It's
completely
derelict, right? And there's almost a direct correlation between the less of media investment in reporting on the city, because media houses just simply cannot afford it. We just don't have the time. There's just too much happening, to the fact that they can just get away with it. That you can pay millions and millions and millions for stationery pens, and that hundreds of millions of rands can be spent on a road that just never ever gets fixed. And so what I always like to tell people is that never underestimate the value of the media, both good and bad. Its ability to for good carries the same weight as its ability to do bad. And that's where the enormous responsibility that we have comes in.
But that also lies in us having a lot more of independent journalism, not tied into any government affiliations or big corporate affiliations, because then you have an incredible ability to tell your truth and to hold your own. But it comes also into something that we were talking about a little earlier, in terms of how we hold journalists as heroes, because we're desperate for these heroes on the stories. And then we see credibility being broken down, and then we question everything that they've said. So in your experience, and I know you're still young, but have you ever had stories where you've regretted your tone or the way you framed a story, or how you've brought that across, and how you'd want to have changed that?
Yeah. So in my career, I've obviously focused on the intersection between investigations and politics. And I think that the regret that I've always had was never focusing enough on the victims of the said corruption, and understanding that what we were reporting on actually had human, real consequences. And I think I had opportunities recently to redeem myself. For example, when we report on Donald Trump and his decision to cut US aid, I'll never forget a conversation that I had with a young girl from Mpumalanga who worked as a first responder in a police office for rape victims. So her job was that she would be at a police station, usually at night, and when women came to open rape cases, she would take them, make them comfortable, offer them a shower, talk to them through the process of opening a case, and then get a male police officer. She's now unemployed because of the US aid cuts, right? And so that consequence of, we speak about things in such big pictures. A vote was vetoed at the UN Security Council, for example. Someone was sanctioned. There's a Auditor General's report that has flagged 800 million corruption. We talk about all of these big things, but what we fail to realize is that how deeply it impacts people's lives. And so that correlation is, I think, where we failed collectively as the media. And we see that consequences. Just watching reportage on Gaza and understanding that it's deliberate policy, that you have young kids being shot at while trying to scramble for some flour is as a result of decisions made by some powerful men. And so toggling between that and understanding that, to say screaming headlines of a deputy president, for example, living in a mansion, is not just for the sake of it. It is about a culture in South Africa where you have this impunity on the top echelons of government, and you have a culture of nepotism or people around politicians just simply benefiting wholesale from the state. And the bigger picture, and that's the point we keep forgetting, is that we live in a country where children go to bed hungry. And so the point of why we tell these stories is not the stories itself, but it's the consequences and the impacts. So I always say to people, this is not a career that you do if you're not a bit crazy, because it's a thankless job. It's a thankless job.
Crazy, and I think very courageous, because as you mentioned, it's not just telling the story, it's the story behind the stories. And I'm so glad you brought that up, because very often I'm watching on these news headlines, and I love the commentary section. We're always in there. And I see people going, why are you wasting time on the story? Why are you wasting time telling us about this? But you're absolutely right. We have to start viewing things with far more of a critical eye to understand that the impact of these stories is what's happening as to why we aren't able to put toilets at every single school, why we still aren't able to make sure everyone's got electricity, why everyone doesn't have food on their table. And this divide is getting huge in South Africa, and independent journalism is needed even more now to be that voice of holding people accountable.
Yeah. And I always say, this frustration that we have when we open our taps in suburban South Africa and there's no water, that's because of governance decisions that were taken in water boards that people just simply didn't pay attention to, and I'll never forget the story of Randburg not having water for weeks only because an official just simply didn't open a valve. Right? Had it not been a journalist putting pressure on that particular entity, and I'm using the most mundane example,
but
to show relevant, because things just don't simply happen. And so I always say that as a person telling stories, I also live the consequences of the stories that we tell.
So which brings me to my next question, is living with those consequences, being a woman, a brown woman in hijab, in the forefront of many difficult conversations, unwrapping a lot of, you are sitting not just in soft journalism, you're sitting in politics, you're sitting in investigative journalism. You literally put a lot of yourself at risk as well. So I agree with you, there has to be a craziness, but a courageousness as well. How do you maintain or hold on to your integrity, your value system, your foundation and your identity of who you are, and still be able to follow this route?
I think it's the why. I think you have to keep reminding yourself, why are you doing this? And I had a conversation with Hasina Gori, who's a friend of mine who's worked alongside me in journalism for many years. And I said to her in frustration, I'm like, why do we do this? And she said to me, because we don't know a life without it. But beyond that, I think it is the ability to connect the dots and to see to see in real time what it means to get those answers, what it means to put that pressure, what it means to foster those conversations. And it's not always opportune. There are times when you are facing immense backlash from the top echelons of power, right? There are other times where you disappoint communities because they believe you're not using your platform how they think you should. Or perhaps, you may disagree with a family member on your viewpoint on a certain politician or person, right? The point is this, that with the enormous power that we have, there's a huge amount of responsibility. And I think that I have always been aware of that responsibility throughout my career, because essentially, I'm a girl from Reservoir Hills that used to use a brush and pretend that she was a journalist, at 6 or 8 years old. But to understand that we live in a country that prioritizes freedom of speech and that's a rarity, something that you can't take for granted. That we live in a country that it's a very normal occurrence for Muslim women in hijab to grill the president and it be normal for him to respond.
You've normalized that for us.
but these are not things that you can take for granted.
Absolutely.
And so, again, when we do the things that we do, when we ask the questions that we do, the most important thing is that it's not in itself the end. The end is the accountability, the change, the impact. It's not the journalism itself. It's not that exclusive interview. It's not, and I mean, in the last few years, a lot of what I've been doing has been a lot more behind the scenes. It's been deciding as an editor on what headlines, on angles, on framing. Those are decisions that you can be torn apart for, and people don't actually realize what it takes to get there. And to imagine that not very long ago, that there were no women of color in those positions to have that enormous power, right? And so again, there are times where you'd make huge mistakes, and people would rightfully flog you for it.
Yeah.
But at the same time, by understanding, and I think that's something that I've had to constantly remind myself, is to say that the goal is for me not to only be the only person in the room. And I think that is to do with all industries, right? And the other thing that I want to say, Zahira, is that excellence is the barrier to which women and women of color have to overcome. We only allowed in a room if we are excellent. And that's unfortunate, because you're surrounded by mediocrity. And so you have to jump through every loop just to get a foot into the door. And that has to change.
But, can I tell you something? That was my question. I was going to ask you about that as well. But I actually love that you brought that up, because I do also think that we're tired of celebrating mediocrity. So if it took excellence for you to push those doors down, good for you, because
but there has to be 500 more.
But everyone around you should also have that same level of excellence, and mediocrity shouldn't have a space there if you've had to prove yourself even more. Because that was my question, because I do often find that as a brown woman in hijab, we have to often prove why we are in certain settings, why you're speaking at certain events, why you're the journalist that has easier access than anyone else to be able to have those questions for the president. I think you almost have to prove your worth as to why you're there compared to somebody else who isn't there. But I love the fact that you have inculcated that excellence, because for all our girls watching, it's like, that's what excellence as a Muslim woman in hijab, in journalism is, because that's what I need to aspire to do, and nothing less than that as well.
And I think that the attitude I've had is that whenever I walked into a room, I didn't believe that I didn't belong there. And that has been the guiding sort of way of how I've approached my career, is that if I happen to be there, then I was meant to be there.
I love that.
And so when you walk into a room where you don't underestimate your own place there, no one would dare underestimate it.
And you hold your own.
And so it comes from a place of understanding that the anomaly are the people who believe that I shouldn't be in this room.
Absolutely.
And
And I think we're pushing those barriers and those boundaries to ensure that people understand that there's space for you there. You are going to hold your own in that space, and you do it really well. I do want to get into a last question, but I know we are running so short on time as always, so we'll have to bring you back for another one. But very quickly, with the advent of social media, the way we see it, and people just scrolling through news, as you said, with almost an apathy for not actually reading what's authentically happening around us, not being able to understand what's authentic, what isn't. And now with AI coming into it, how do we still hold on to journalism that has integrity, that holds to truth, that holds to transparency, that holds to us also as consumers of that, exercising critical thinking?
Yeah, I think the important thing is to, as a consumer of news, is to spend time to identify the news sources that you trust, and to have a metric to which you hold information up to, a standard to which you say, this is what I trust and this is what I don't trust. The second thing is to be more engaged and more curious as to where information is coming from, and I think that from those of us who tell stories, from those of us who are hoping to use information as a tool for change, I think the burden is much higher now. And so I would never ever be one of those people that say computers are going to replace our jobs, because people trust people.
Absolutely.
However, computers can make us redundant if we don't do the thing that only humans can do, which is get legitimacy and to foster deep trust. And that comes with a real commitment to what we do and a real commitment to our craft.
And also understanding, like you said at the beginning, understanding your why you're doing what you're doing, because when you put so much of yourself into it, it changes how we receive that story, because it's not just about the story, it's about the story behind the stories. Qaanitah, always a pleasure to share the platform with you, and I hope it's not the last. I hope we do get to see you again soon. But thank you so much for making the time to be here and to share a little bit so that we can deal with news in a way that's a lot more responsible as well.
Absolutely. Shukran for having me. And just to say that platforms like this go such a long way in drowning out the toxicity and the negativity that exist in the online digital sphere. To have empowering conversations like this, the enormous task of profiling women and doing it in a professional and incredible, engaging way, goes beyond just this particular show, but I think affects people and women in the way that they see themselves and how we see the world around us. So shukran to you.
No, thank you so much. Shukran to you as well. I think this was what we needed to know. This is what we need to be able to understand and sift through what is sensationalism, what is true, authentic journalism. Do follow the Debrief Network, because they are definitely telling the stories beyond this. Shukran for joining us on air. I look forward to seeing you again next week.